Hi everyone, I'm Rehana, Festive Events campaigner here at Freedom for Animals. And today I am having a chat with Eve Massie from OneKind. At OneKind, they also run a Festive Events campaign, which is incredible. And so we thought it'd be really cool just to have a chat and see how different things are up in Scotland to down here. So thank you, Eve, so much for agreeing to this talk. It's a strange time at the moment, so it's nice to kind of connect.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for asking me. It was great to see that someone doing the reindeer work down south, because obviously we're
Mhm.
exclusively based in Scotland. So I was
Mhm.
having a wee look into it to see how different it was down there. So it'll be interesting to chat about that.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let's get into the questions. How does the Festive Events campaign at OneKind usually work?
So our festive campaigns exclusively our reindeer campaign. So do you want me to talk a wee bit about sort of the campaign actions that we take?
Yeah, that would be amazing, please.
Yeah. So we campaign for an end to live reindeer displays.
Hmm.
So that's your reindeer displays that you'll see up and down the country in Scotland. So for example, what's quite popular is local authorities will host live reindeer parades, pulling Santa down a sleigh down the high street. But also got shopping centres and garden centres will do live displays where they pen the reindeer for photo opportunities and petting opportunities of children. Actually, they stopped using reindeer this year, but Scotland's theme park last year used live reindeer also, as far as
Okay.
I'm aware, and we do have venture parks that have been using them. So our campaign is to end live reindeer displays. Um, and what we'll usually do is around September time, that's when people start to publicise their use of live reindeer displays. So we write to each local authority and private business that uses them to enter a dialogue, to explain the welfare issues and propose alternatives, animal-friendly alternatives.
Great.
Our fantastic volunteers also write to them, but we write obviously on behalf of OneKind. Our volunteers write as members of the public to say that they don't wish to attend any of the displays because of the use of live reindeer.
Hmm.
And last year, we also, ourselves and our volunteers, obtained footage of the live reindeer displays, mainly the ones in local authorities and high streets because they're accessible to everyone. And we put together a video which compared the lives of wild deer compared to the lives of those in captivity held for live reindeer displays. So we
Hmm.
just compiled the footage to do a comparison.
Yeah,
This year, obviously, things have been a wee bit different with COVID. Um,
that's my next question, actually. So,
yeah, okay.
it's how different is your campaign this year because of COVID?
So we did have to alter slightly. I think with most charities, will perhaps felt the same with all campaigns, is that we're not quite sure where the world is and whether these types of things that normally happen are going to happen this year.
Hmm.
So we came to this a lot later just because venues published whether they were using live reindeer a lot later in the year.
Yeah.
So as I said, usually we'd go early September and we felt there's enough time to hopefully they can reconsider the decision for that year.
Hmm.
While we came a wee bit later into it this year, we didn't really think it was reasonable or likely that they would then sort of change their displays that last minute.
Hmm.
Also, we are aware that many businesses are struggling for income at the moment, and so again, it was very unlikely that something that would pull in income they were going to cancel at the last minute. So instead, we wrote to authorities, not authorities, sorry, we wrote to the private businesses that are hosting live reindeer displays to raise welfare issues, but also enter a dialogue about next year and whether they would reconsider for next year.
Hmm.
The good news for reindeers, actually, last year in Scotland, as far as we know, there was about 15 local authorities and businesses that hosted live reindeer displays. This year, because of COVID, there's actually only three, and two of those are in either Glasgow or the surrounding areas, which you may know were on a lockdown.
Yeah.
So that meant that at least one of these displays, I think, didn't actually have time to go ahead. So the alternative might be that they'll host these in January instead, but we'll have to wait and
Okay.
see what the restrictions are in January. But
Hmm.
this does mean that less reindeer have suffered this Christmas, or will suffer this Christmas,
Hmm.
which is good news in a difficult time.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit bittersweet, isn't it? Because we don't want the reindeer to
Yeah,
be used, but then we also understand that these organisers haven't come to this conclusion out of the goodness of their hearts. It's just because they're not allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was interesting that all the local authorities decided not to host displays this year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we do know Aberdeen City Council stopped funding live reindeer displays last year, and Stirling Council was open to a dialogue with us about alternatives. Um, while I do think the likely reason that most local authorities stopped this year is because of COVID,
Yeah.
it does give us perhaps some hope for the future that going a year without hosting these displays might mean that for next year they'll be exploring alternatives. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'd like to believe that maybe they could see they don't need to use the reindeer in order to put on a good show and to still entertain people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, the theme park in Scotland, we actually had originally reported that there was 4 reindeer displays going ahead this year, and that's because the theme park, which is called M&D's, had posted they had a circus with reindeer to help Santa find his reindeer. So that was alarm bells.
Oh, no.
Because
Yeah.
of course, wild animals are banned for circus use in Scotland, but there was a wee bit of a grey area whether that includes reindeer.
Because they're semi-wild, yeah.
Yeah, so they're technically domesticated, but they're not, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose, originally domesticated in the UK. So we weren't too sure where that fell, and we're having to do a lot of research into that. But they actually got back to me to say that they're not using live reindeer. So I guess it's just stuffed
Yeah.
reindeer.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this next question is probably a little bit difficult to answer because we don't know. But what are your projections for reindeer events in Scotland next year?
It would be bold of me, I suppose, to say that I anticipate that local authorities will have had a year off and realise that they don't need to use them. But I do think there's something positive in them going a year without live reindeer displays,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
I do think that's perhaps, as you mentioned, they'll see that perhaps they don't actually need to use live reindeer, or perhaps some of the reindeer reindeer suppliers such as the Cairngorms may start to sort of change their mind about whether this is actually necessary, especially for them to raise money to raise the reindeer. So I am hopeful that at least less places will host live reindeer displays. But as I said, it's so unsure and uncertain to know, because it's very unlikely that these local authorities are not hosting displays for animal welfare reasons.
Of course, yeah. Can you recall one of the worst events you've seen with live reindeer in Scotland? And is there something particular about that event that made it so horrible?
With terms to reindeer suppliers, there's the Cairngorms reindeer herd, but there's also low level, sort of low ground reindeer farm suppliers, and that's where the welfare is a lot more questionable.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that this year they've been sort of hosting Santa meet and greets at the farm where they host the reindeer, which, as far as I'm aware of, is sort of in their back yard in their field.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're based around Glasgow, and when the restrictions were announced this year, which would have to put an end to the displays, they ramped it up in the run up. So I think they're open from 10 a.m. till midnight to see the reindeer.
Wow,
and
that
was really disappointing to think that reindeer would have to be presented as in a live reindeer display with, adults and young children, potentially with photographs, loud noise, lots of petting until midnight. So that's probably the worst one that I can recall.
That sounds really awful.
Yeah.
Just the sheer number of hours that the reindeer would have been exposed to noise and people.
And it's just like further reinforcing the idea of reindeers as commodities. Like, well, we're having to shut down, so we'll need to exploit them as much as possible for money before midnight.
Yeah. Which welfare concern about reindeer used in festive events bothers you the most as a campaigner, and why?
For welfare specifically, this is maybe quite an unusual answer, but I actually personally think the transport. And the reason that I would say the transport of reindeer to these live displays is because there is research to suggest that these journeys are highly stressful for reindeer. Mm-hmm. So it's a 1997 study, and it found that reindeers do find these journeys stressful, and the longer the journey, the more stressful. And also, if the journey has long winding roads, then it's more stressful. So based on where we know some of these displays have been held, such as Aberdeen, we know that and then based on where we know some of the reindeer suppliers are, we're quite certain that these animals will at least have to travel longer than 2 hours. And if it's from the Cairngorm reindeer herd, then that's in the Highlands, and of course there's a lot of long winding roads.
Yeah.
So the study recommended that journeys should be less than 2 hours because they'll get higher stress levels after that. So I think that is actually possibly something that I find the most difficult, because I know for sure that these journeys are stressful. And I say for sure because there's so many welfare concerns to live reindeer displays. But as reindeer prey animals, they do tend to be able to hide their stress or their fear. So sometimes it's hard to know whether that animal's exhibiting stress. And also they can exhibit stress or the outcome of feeling stress a period of time after the event. So it could be weeks later that the symptoms are then starting to show. But also, I suppose this isn't maybe a welfare concern, this is maybe more sort of a moral or ethical concern. But I just really dislike the idea of reindeer as Christmas props. I just find it so uncomfortable seeing them like in tiny pens in shopping centres, bright lights, loud music, busyness. I just think it reinforces the idea of animals are entertainment, which of course they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. I think when I've come across different images of reindeer bingies in events across the UK, like in previous years, it's just when they have like bells on their antlers, and
Yeah.
they're have all the Christmas colours on them, and it's like they're not living, breathing beings. It's really disturbing.
Exactly. I saw one in, obviously this is not Scotland, but in Northamptonshire. They were in a Tesco's, just penned. I think it was beside the tills, and they just they're usually penned outside. I'm not sure if that makes a wealth of difference, but it's just like the bright lights of like a supermarket.
Yeah.
It just looked absolutely miserable for the reindeer.
Yeah, that's horrible. I've noticed that the Cairngorm Reindeer Centre have made the decision not to travel to events this year. So instead, they're inviting people to come and see the reindeer. The reindeer at their site. How do you feel about that?
It's interesting you say that, because I was actually a wee bit confused about what they were doing this year, because I saw they were, as you said, they invite people to look at the reindeer, but they also had a sort of sentence to say that these events weren't going ahead for 2020. So to be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but if they are still going ahead, I would actually prefer that people visited the reindeer at the Cairngorm reindeer herd, because they are, I suppose, sort of semi-wild, free roaming herd. So especially if you're taking children, I think it reinforces a better idea of what these animals are, which are wild animals, not animals that you pop down to Tesco and see when you're getting your shopping for a wee thrill. So I would much prefer that. And actually, I've not been to visit them, but our director and previous policy officer did go to visit the Cairngorm reindeer herd last year. And while, as I've said, we don't agree with them using reindeer in live Christmas displays, and they know that we don't agree with that, in terms of where reindeer could be if they were domesticated, I think we'd safely say it was the best possible place that they could be. They were evidently very well looked after and well fed, and sort of, as I say, sort of semi-wild. So yeah, I would much prefer that people would go visit them in a more natural habitat.
Have you ever entered into dialogue with them about the possibility of them becoming a sanctuary?
Yeah, we have, and they're actually quite open to it.
Great.
So they, as I say, they know we've spoken to them. They know we're not comfortable with the use of reindeer, and they're not defensive or anything in the slightest. They are receptive to what they say, and they do seem to sort of consider it. So we've not had any concrete answer on that, but I do think in time that it is possible that they will end the use of their reindeer in displays.
Well, it sounds really positive that you have that dialogue with them and that they're not defensive.
No, not all. They are a lovely group of people. So yeah, no, it's good to have that sort of, we can agree on one thing, but we don't agree on this, and we should enter this conversation and talk about why that is. So yeah, they're great in that sense.
That's great. Do you have any thoughts on reindeer being susceptible to COVID?
I'll admit it's not something I've looked into, but I suppose it's quite possible. And if everyone's petting them, can it be transmitted to humans? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
What about yourself? Is that something?
Where I'm working on a video about it at the moment. Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah,
Awesome.
just because I think it's not really been talked about enough, and it's not really
No.
common knowledge, and it feels important and topical, and the kind of information that would get people to sort of stop and listen and think about it. Because from an ideological perspective, we know that animals shouldn't be used, but I think when you combine that with the facts and sort of a threat to public health, which it is, then I think that can be quite impactful. So yeah, I'm planning to put out a video. I'm just sort of comprising different pieces of information and evidence, and um, something that I've noticed this year actually down here is that because a lot of our suppliers have had their events that they were going to cancelled, they've been going into schools instead. And I was wondering if that's something that you've seen in Scotland.
Really? No, I've not seen that. I can't say for sure it's not happening, but I'm quite sure we would have heard about it. And I think there's only 2 suppliers in Scotland anyway, and as far as I know, they wouldn't. Even if they wanted to, the travel restrictions, I don't think they could.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, because I kind of saw that, and then I read, and then I knew already that reindeer was susceptible to COVID, and I thought, and then I saw some photographs that had been shared on Twitter from the schools and some of these suppliers, and just the children being so close, and I just thought, oh, it's a PR nightmare, but really good sort of evidence, and like really useful for us as campaigners. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. If you could say anything to event organisers watching this who still use like reindeer and other live animals in their events, what would you tell them?
I would really implore them to consider the welfare issues and to enter a dialogue with us. Just so I do feel that many of these perhaps haven't considered the welfare issues or have been reassured that it's fine for reindeer welfare. So I would ask them to be more sort of willing to enter a dialogue with ourselves so we can talk about the welfare issues. I would also point out, as I did earlier, that Aberdeen City Council have stopped using live reindeer displays and Stirling Council has considered it. So I would ask them to sort of, not to rebel, but that there are other councils that aren't using these reindeer and still having successful Christmas events. There's so many animal-friendly alternatives as well. They really don't need to have live reindeer pen for a couple of hours. You could use, I don't know, robotic reindeer, toy reindeer. There's so many other options. So I would urge them to be more creative with their Christmas events. I'm sure there's lots of local artists who could help them with more creative ideas to celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, definitely. And I've always thought it must, as an event organizer, it must be a lot easier not to have to consider dealing with live animals.
I know, exactly. Yeah, I imagine that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I just think there's so many, as you say, easier, probably less expensive alternatives that are animal friendly that they really should be exploring in 2021.
Yeah, definitely. To what extent do you think we can successfully influence the general public and change the opinion of those who frequent festive events using reindeer with the campaigns that we're doing?
Yeah, I think we can, and I think we have seen some success with that so far. As I say, I think for many people, they see reindeer with reindeer handlers and they don't think of that there might possibly be welfare issues, because if there were welfare issues, why are these places hosting them? And why are all the handlers so happy to chat to them? Our video, I know, had some success with people who did get in touch with us to say that they'd no longer be taking their family to these displays. So I think it's just getting the right message with the right level of sort of impact. We don't ever want to be saying, like, don't go to these, like, we encourage people not to go to these events, but we don't want to be, I don't want to really say the word aggressive, but I think it's having a nice enough message to take it from a point that people don't want to go somewhere where they think that animals' welfare is poor. They don't. They just maybe don't know that. And I think that's why our videos or writing to people or blog posts and this interview is a good way of highlighting to people that these animal events aren't actually animal friendly. And I think the more people who are aware of that will stop and not go to these events anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I feel in kind of different things that I've been reading the last month and a half or so is that there's just not enough in like public awareness. People are
Yeah.
not informed, they're not educated about it, and unfortunately, these event organizers, and then when different papers do write-ups, I read one a few days ago that had written up about one of the suppliers visiting a local school here, and it said, reindeer are very friendly and they adapt very easily to the UK climate, and it's just not true. And
Mm-hmm.
someone reading this would think, oh great, and they'd have no concerns to then take their child or children
Yeah,
to go and
absolutely.
visit them. In your mind, you've actually answered this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to ask you again because I think it's really important. In your mind, what would be the best case scenario for the reindeer who now live here permanently in the UK?
I'd say to be at the Cairngorm
Mm-hmm.
reindeer herd and not to be used for Christmas displays. Yeah, as I touched on earlier, it's very evident that the animals there are well looked after and well cared for, well fed, which is important, and also important that they're under a lot less stress. I think it was the Veterinary Reindeer Society
Mm-hmm.
that had said that actually most of the diseases in reindeer in the UK are stress related,
Okay.
because they're not used to this, as you say, this sort of climate and this sort of environment. And I think the Cairngorm reindeer herd is the best place where that can be replicated,
Mm-hmm.
a semi-wild life. So yeah, it would be our wish that the animals were sort of retired to the Cairngorm reindeer herd.
Great. A last question that's quite different is, how are you spending Christmas this year?
Oh, I love that. A nice, joyful ending. Yes, I'll be spending Christmas up north in the north of Scotland with my family. My siblings and I all live in different places, so it'll be nice to be reunited. And my rescue dog will also be there, and he'll also have a Christmas stocking this year. So that's how I'm spending Christmas.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for speaking with me, Eve. It's been a real pleasure. And
Yeah,
thank you for all the incredible work that you do up in Scotland for animals with OneKind.
thank you.
It's noticed and appreciated, and yeah, really, really valuable within the community.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy
You
New
too,
Year.
and thanks for the work that you do for animals too. It was really nice chatting today.